The floorboards still creaked when she walked, as if the old barn knew her better than anyone alive. That night, the lanterns flickered with golden resolve, casting shadows that moved with her every step. She wasn't there for the hay or the quiet. She was there because the world had forgotten her. But the barn hadn't. And on that splintered wooden floor, she remembered what her body used to feel like before grief had stiffened it. So she danced, alone, with no music but the wind. She had been the town's youngest teacher once, barely 23, armed with chalk-stained fingers, long skirts, and eyes that believed too much in children. But tragedy didn't care about belief. It swept through one winter like a storm with no name, taking her parents in a single week in the school with them. And with no family left and no job to hold her name in place, she drifted. They called her the orphaned teacher, as if her title now belonged to the sorrow that shaped her. But the barn remembered her joy. It had watched her learn to dance at 13, twirling barefoot between bales of hay, giggling with her father's old records echoing on the walls. Now, older, worn, and carrying the silence of too many losses, she danced again, no giggles this time, only grace. She needed no audience. She was dancing to forget, or perhaps to remember. Outside, the wind shifted. The field stretched wide beneath a crescent moon, wrapped in silence, like the world was holding its breath. She didn't notice the stranger on the hill. Not yet. He was still watching, still listening. And the fiddle in his hand, carved from ashwood, with a broken string tied in wire, trembled slightly, as if it, too, remembered a sound long gone. The stranger had arrived in town with no last name and no reason. Folks saw him sleeping by the river, warming cans by fire, humming songs no one else knew. Some thought he was a runaway soldier, others thought he was crazy. But the truth was more complicated. He was looking for something, or maybe someone. He didn't knock on doors. He listened to barns and graveyards and train whistles at night. Because sometimes, you don't find purpose by chasing it. You let it rise from where it hides. That night, his ears caught something faint. Not words, not music, but rhythm. A rhythm too soft for the wind and too graceful for animals. He followed it across the fields, boots silent in the soil, until he reached the edge of the barn's broken fence. And there, he saw her. The orphan teacher moved like someone resurrecting memories. Her hair loosened in the night's breeze, her skirt brushing straw in silent arcs. The lantern light painted her shadow across the barn wall. And for a moment, the world forgot to judge her. He didn't speak, didn't step closer. He only lifted the fiddle to his shoulder. A part of him hesitated. Who was he to interrupt such a private mourning? But something in him whispered, she wasn't mourning. She was surviving. And so, with fingers calloused by wandering, he played one long, trembling note. Not loud, not sharp, just enough. Her foot stopped mid-step. The barn, which had only ever echoed her breath and her heartbeat, now held something more. And in that instant, her story changed. The note hung in the barn like a thread between two souls, barely there, but strong enough to pull memory out of silence. She didn't turn at first. Her breath caught in her chest, unsure if the sound had been real, or if her loneliness had finally started playing tricks. But when the second note came, low, aching, and as soft as a confession, her eyes closed. No one had played for her in years. Outside the cracked window, the moon slid higher, and the stranger kept playing. Each note stitched itself into the fabric of the barn, into the grain of its old walls, into the rhythm she had just left behind. He didn't rush. He didn't dare. It wasn't a song for an audience. It was an offering, a quiet apology from the universe that had taken so much from her. She finally turned. Their eyes didn't meet. Not yet. He was a silhouette at the edge of the broken doorway, fiddle under chin, hat pulled low. But the sound came from a place that knew pain, and perhaps even deeper than that, from a place that knew how to cradle it gently. Her body responded before her mind could catch up. She stepped toward him, not to leave the barn, but to dance again, not for grief. This time, for healing. She twirled slowly, allowing her fingers to trail through the air like ink on invisible paper. The fiddle answered her movements, rising when she spun, sighing when she stilled. They didn't need words. Between the creaks of the barn and the hum of strings, something sacred had formed, an understanding too old to name. The man's boots shifted slightly in the dirt. His shadow swayed. His arms, though tired, guided the bough with devotion. He had played for taverns, for dying men, for broken-hearted mothers, but never for someone who danced like they were rewriting a lost chapter of their life. The wind outside hushed. Even the animals kept still. In that sliver of time, the orphaned teacher and the nameless fiddler carved out a world of their own. One note, one step, one heartbeat at a time. She forgot the town that turned its back on her. He forgot the miles he had walked just to feel alive again. They became music. They became motion. They became a reason for the barn to still stand. But nothing that pure lasts untouched. A branch cracked outside. The stranger stopped playing. She froze mid-spin. Their world shattered just slightly, like glass catching a scratch. The music had woken something, not just in their hearts, but in the fields around them. Unseen eyes were watching. Unspoken rumors were being born. And in the town that barely remembered her name, someone would soon start asking why music was coming from the abandoned barn again. The fiddler lowered his instrument slowly. His chest rose and fell like a man who had just let go of something he'd carried too long. She looked at him, and for the first time in years, she smiled. Not wide, not proud, just enough. Enough to say, "I heard you." Enough to mean, "Please come back." The next morning, the town stirred with whispers. Whispers that didn't come from the church steps or the market stands, but from the soil itself. Someone had seen a light in the old barn. Someone else had heard music. Real music. Not just wind scraping tin or animals shifting in the straw, but a fiddle, played slow and haunting, like a ghost remembering it once had a heart. The baker's wife muttered at first. The sheriff's boy swore he'd seen a shadow move through the fields at dawn. And by noon, the town was buzzing. They hadn't spoken the teacher's name in months. Not since her last attempt to reopen the school failed. Not since she stood at the town meeting, eyes red, dress dusty, begging for just a few books and a roof. They had dismissed her then, chalking her up to dreams and grief. But now, the town was curious. Back at the barn, silence returned. The teacher sat on the loft ledge, legs swinging above the hay below. Her hair was still wild from last night's dance. Her eyes more awake than they'd been in years. In her hands, she held the memory of a sound, the hum of a stranger's fiddle, the pause before that final note. She didn't know who he was, or why he'd played for her, but the ache it left was oddly comforting. It meant she wasn't the only one who remembered how it felt to matter. She spent the morning sweeping the barn, not just because of the dust, but because something inside her demanded preparation, as if joy had peeked in for a moment and might come again if things were clean enough. The loft was cleared, the windows opened, and the space where she danced was no longer just a forgotten floor. It was a stage for healing. Across the hills, the fiddler walked. His boots were cracked. His coat was stitched with road and rain, but his hands still tingled from the way she moved to his tune. He hadn't meant to stay. He never did. Each town was just another page in the long story he never told. But this one had a barn that breathed, and a woman who danced like forgiveness. He didn't go back that night. Not yet. Some moments are too sacred to repeat quickly. He sat by the river instead, carving tiny notches into the edge of his fiddle. Each notch meant something, somebody. He'd played for who made the world feel less heavy. She got a notch, deep and clean, but the town was moving. Slowly, suspiciously. A few boys wandered past the barn pretending not to look. An old farmer paused at the fence, tipping his hat to the wind as if greeting a ghost. Rumors were more powerful than facts here. And when people can't control a story, they start trying to ruin it. That night, she lit the lanterns again. No one came, but she danced anyway. Because when a soul rediscovers its rhythm, it doesn't wait for applause. And far off under the stars, the stranger began to play again. Not near the barn, just to the sky, as if telling it, "I'll be back. Let her know I'm listening." The fourth night came with a different kind of wind. Not the gentle, healing breeze that had carried her skirt when she danced, but something stiff, expectant. The barn sat quieter than usual, as though it, too, sensed the shift. And the teacher, now brushing out the floor for the second time that day, paused more often than before. Her hands trembled when she lit the lanterns. Not from fear, but from knowing that eyes were watching. They had gathered near the tree line, townsfolk pretending to be invisible. A pastor, a widow, 2 teenagers from the general store, all of them drawn by the rumors. A woman dancing in the barn, a man playing music no one had heard in years. Some said it was witchcraft. Others said it was loneliness. But all of them came. hearts secretly hungry for what they wouldn't admit. They wanted to believe and wonder again. The orphan teacher didn't look up when she stepped barefoot into the open space. She felt them, the silent witnesses in the dark. But tonight, she danced not to heal. She danced to show them that sorrow could still bloom. Her arms moved like she was gathering invisible children, her feet marking the rhythm of lessons untaught. She gave them everything they once ignored, the beauty of someone too strong to vanish. Then, without warning, the fiddle rose. No one saw him arrive. He stood just beyond the barn's reach, where the lantern's light faded into gold-edged shadow. But the music? Oh, the music! It bent the air like heat, tugging on the townsfolk's memories, their first loves, their buried dreams, the soft footsteps of those they had forgotten. For a moment, the crowd didn't breathe. She spun, hands lifted like wings in stormlight. And as her hair caught the glow of the lanterns, she looked like a question answered too late. Her body and his bow became a story told without words. And even the cynics in the woods could feel it. Something lost had been found again. A child gasped. A man wept without knowing why. And the woman who once begged for help at the town meeting danced with such grace. The barn seemed to float around her. But not all who watched were moved. In the back, behind the pastor, stood someone else. The mayor's clerk, the one who had shut down the school funding. His jaw clenched as the crowd leaned forward in awe. To him, this wasn't revival, it was rebellion. The town's shame made visible. If she rose again, it meant they had failed her. The music stopped abruptly. She dropped to her knees, not in exhaustion, but in peace. And just like that, the crowd vanished into the trees. Some hurried, some lingered, but all were changed. The fiddler disappeared too, like mist before morning. But the next day, on the teacher's barn door, someone left a note with no name. It read, "We heard. We're sorry. Teach us again." Morning broke like a hymn that had finally found its voice. The barn no longer looked abandoned. It breathed again. Sunlight spilled through its wooden ribs, kissing the floor that had once held only dust and silence. And in the middle of it all, the orphan teacher stood barefoot with a broom in one hand and the mayor's letter in the other. They had come at dawn. Not many, just three. The pastor, the widow, and the boy who once mocked her behind his mother's bakery stall. They didn't say much. They brought brushes, nails, wood, and hope. No speeches, no excuses. They just started fixing things. A new plank for the broken bench. Fresh straw for the horses that might someday return. An old school bell, cleaned and tied with twine, hung from the loft rafters. That afternoon, more followed. The seamstress brought bolts of unused cloth, dyed in fading primary colors. She draped them like banners between the beams. The blacksmith arrived with extra nails. Even the children came, carrying pails of water and wide-eyed wonder. They asked her, "Will there be stories?" And she nodded, because stories were the only thing she'd never run out of. They didn't call it a school yet. Not aloud, but everyone could feel it. The barn was changing, and so was she. Her steps grew lighter, her eyes steadier. She stopped brushing her hair with her fingers and started tying it again with the ribbon her mother gave her long ago. She no longer avoided the mirror. She met it, saw herself not as the woman who was abandoned, but as the woman who remained. The fiddler watched from afar. He never entered during the day, but every evening, just before twilight, he left something by the barn. A flower, a feather, a song scribbled on brown parchment. She never saw him leave them, but she knew it was him. The way the bowstring was always tied with copper wire gave it away. And each night, after the town had gone quiet, she danced. Not in mourning, not even in healing. Now, she danced in gratitude. Her movements told a story the barn never wanted to forget. A story of loss that birthed unity. A story of music that mended what the mayor's funds never could. A story of an orphan teacher who taught the town how to remember itself. One night, the fiddler stayed longer. She knew he was there, even without seeing him. She moved slower this time, like she wanted the music to last forever. He played softer than before, his notes brushing against the walls like memories not yet spoken. And in that space, half barn, half school, half sanctuary, they did not speak, yet everything was said. The town, in its quiet shame, had begun to rewrite its story. But there was one more thing left to give. One final gesture that would either lift the barn into legend or send it back into shadow. And the stranger had it. In a box, tied in string, waiting for the right moment. The box was small, worn at the corners, wrapped in frayed twine. He left it on the old stool by the barn door, just before the sun disappeared behind the hills. Inside it was a folded piece of sheet music, not new, not pristine, but written by hand, in slanted strokes, full of pauses and corrections. At the bottom of the page, a single word had been scrawled. Yours. She knew the handwriting. It was her father's. He had written that melody for her the year she turned 10. Before the fever, before the orphaning, before the silence. She remembered the day he played it for her in this very barn, lifting her onto his shoulders and spinning, until the stars blurred above the rafters. But the song had vanished with time. She hadn't known a copy still existed. Now here it was, reborn, in paper and placed in her hands by the stranger, who had never asked for anything. She didn't cry. Instead, she lit every lantern in the barn, pulled open the doors, laid the sheet music across the piano that had been donated just a day before. Then she waited, and as twilight deepened, the town came. They came with their children and their regrets. They came carrying tin cups of tea and hand-woven blankets. The barn filled, not with noise, but with reverence. The widow from town passed around a basket of letters. The children had written to Miss, thanking her for returning the stories. The pastor brought the school's bell rope, freshly mended. And then came the music. Not from the piano, not even from the fiddle, but from the hearts of the people who had once looked away and were now choosing to stay. The fiddler arrived last. He stood outside for a long moment, unsure if he was welcome in the light. But then she stepped into the doorway, lifted the bow from his hand, and pressed it gently back to his fingers. Without a word, he played. And this time, she didn't dance alone. The children moved with her. Then the widows. Then the clerk who had once signed the school's closure. Even the mayor, watching from the fence, removed his hat. No one led. No one followed. It was not a performance. It was a memory becoming flesh. And when the song finally ended, the barn was no longer a barn. It was a school, a chapel, a stage, a home, a place where stories weren't just told, they were lived. The orphaned teacher sat beside the stranger as the lanterns flickered low. He said nothing, but she placed her hand over his on the fiddle and held it there until the night was still again. And when dawn came, the town's first school bell in years rang once more. But it didn't just echo down the road. It echoed inside them all.